I hope you're ready to get carried away because it's a very Carrie episode of the Libertarian Christian podcast. I'm referring, of course, to Carrie Baldwin, host of Mere Liberty and co-host of the Reformed Libertarians podcast, and also one of my co-contributors for the newly released edition of the book Faith Seeking Freedom. If you missed Freedom Fest this year, you missed a lot, but one thing you don't have to miss is hearing Carrie present her libertarian case for being pro-life and her interaction with pro-choice, I guess we'll say activist, thinker, Michael Shermer, because we have that presentation right here. Now, I've been asked to note that there were some technical issues with microphones early on in this recording, but our team at Podsworth Media has done a darn fine job, pardon my French, of smoothing that over. Nevertheless, you may notice some differences in this recording compared to how our in-studio recordings usually sound. But before we play Carrie's debate, I guess, I've asked Carrie to give us a short introduction to what you're about to see or hear. So, Carrie, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. You carried that out nicely.
Thank you. Well, so what should people know about this? I mean, first of all, is it a debate or what exactly was it?
So what we called it was an informal debate. From my perspective, pro-life and pro-choice libertarians actually have quite a bit of common ground. And even in my preparation to debate Michael Shermer, as I looked at his position on things, he and I have a lot of common ground. And so what we didn't want to do was we didn't want to, rehash, relitigate a bunch of things that actually pro-choice and pro-life libertarians agree upon. Really, the thing that is at issue is whether a woman's bodily autonomy and agency extends to the right to abort or terminate a pregnancy. And so that's what it centers on. The resolution for the debate was that a consistent libertarian defense of women's rights requires recognizing fetal self-ownership. And so even with that, it was a reframe from does the fetus have rights to is there an advantage for women and women's rights if we actually go ahead and recognize fetal rights. One of the things that I try to get across in the debate is that by recognizing fetal rights, it acts as sort of a corrective lens for some of the issues that we are facing in society. And this is everything from, economic issues like cost of living to justice issues like sexual assault and rape, which unfortunately we didn't get into in the debate, to relationship issues, and that by offering legal abortion instead of solving those problems actually obscures reality, and it obscures the ability of our society to actually solve those problems.
Well, is there anything else? I think you've covered that pretty well. Is there anything else about the framing that you might want to explain for those who are maybe used to hearing, kind of a conservative pro-life case, that they might be hearing something different here that they're not used to hearing, just so they kind of understand going in where your point of view is different?
Yeah, so I think the main issue for my perspective and what I'm calling pro-life libertarianism is that the rights of the woman and the fetus are not at odds with one another. So how this usually plays out is the pro-choice side will compromise fetal rights in favor of the woman, and the pro-life side typically compromises women's rights in favor of the fetus. And so there's sort of this, it's treated as sort of a zero-sum game. If you give any on one end, then the other end loses something. And so I am actually arguing that the libertarian principles of self-ownership and non-aggression demonstrate that the rights of the woman and the offspring are not at odds with one another, and that they cohere. And this is very important for not just the implications for rights for both women and offspring, but again, acting as a corrective lens. A consistent theory of human rights must be internally coherent. It can't contain contradictions, otherwise it falsifies itself. And if libertarian, a libertarian theory of rights falsifies itself, then, well, we should pack up and go home. It's not something worth defending.
Awesome. Well, that's a great introduction. So I don't want to keep people waiting. So without further ado, we'll get into it. Here's Carrie's 2026 Freedom Fest presentation, which now the title I have for this is Rethinking Women's Rights, the Unconventional Pro-Life Libertarian Case.
Yes. Okay. That was sort of the title for the event. And then we have the resolution.
Okay.
I will also say that I am on Mere Liberty, which is where all my content is at. I will be hosting a post-debate live Q&A via Zoom. And we've posted a link to that sign up in the description for this episode. So when you're done watching the episode, please sign up for that live Q&A. It's totally free, but I would love to hear listener and viewer questions.
Terrific. Let's get into it.
Okay, well, thank you. Ooh, there we go. Now we have a hot mic. Thank you integrally for sponsoring and participating in this debate, and thank you all for coming. So welcome to this Freedom Fest session on women's rights and abortion, which is also sponsored by the Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm the president of that organization. We're at booth 415. We hope that you will come and see us a little later. We are glad that you're here, and we hope that you are as excited as we are to jump into a fascinating discussion of some deep ideas. Now, if you ask a group of libertarians about taxation, you'll get a unified theory of everything. All problems solved, no discussion needed. But if you ask about abortion, you'll probably get about 8 factions and an argument and maybe come to blows by the end of that discussion. Because libertarians have ultimately argued about this for about 50 years and without a particularly definitive resolution. Now, that's actually evidence that something philosophically interesting really is going on. Not that everybody involved is just stupid or acting in bad faith. So this afternoon's debate, or perhaps more accurately described as a moderated discussion, is not the standard abortion debate. The resolution before us again is this: a consistent libertarian defense of women's rights requires recognizing fetal self-ownership. Now, that framing is quite deliberate. We're not asking whether or not fetal self-ownership is true. It's asking whether a libertarian who takes women's rights seriously can remain consistent and coherent without taking this question of fetal self-ownership seriously. That's a tighter and more interesting argument to really have, and that's the one you're about to hear. Now, LCI, the Libertarian Christian Institute, has just published Faith Seeking Freedom. This is our new book, which is published on June 30th, and it takes exactly these types of questions very seriously at the intersections of theology, philosophy, economics, and individual liberty. It'll be available at our booth, and we hope you'll come and visit us and learn more about our mission to equip Christians to promote a free society. So let me introduce our debaters very briefly. Carrie Baldwin from LCI is a philosopher and writer who has spent years developing a distinctly libertarian pro-life framework, grounded in self-ownership rather than religious authority. Michael Shermer is a science historian, the founder of Skeptic magazine, and a voice for the pro-choice case on libertarian grounds. Both of them have done their homework, and neither of them is going to let the other off very easily. I'm happy to be able to welcome them to the stage today. My job today is just to keep the argument moving and on target. So, we'll begin. At first, I'm going to ask our participants here to give a brief opening statement. We'll try to keep, I'm not going to be keeping a lot of time, guys. This is really about discussing the issues concretely and in good conversation and dialogue with each other. So first, I'll ask Carrie to give about around 3 minutes of an opening statement, and ask Michael to do the same.
All right. Thank you very much to everyone for being here. I do take a pro-life position, but it's really an unconventional position. I challenge both sides of the conventional debate when it comes to abortion. So the problems that I see with the conventional debate are at least threefold. First, both sides accept the premise that human rights are fundamentally in conflict. So the pro-choice side tends to compromise fetal rights in favor of the woman's, and the pro-life side tends to compromise women's rights in favor of the fetus. Both sides also say that women are victims of their own sex. The pro-life side will say that a woman is vulnerable and in need of protection and an authority figure such as a father, husband, doctor, or somebody else to make the tough decisions for her. The pro-choice position tends to say that a woman is a victim of evolutionary biology. She got stuck, short-shifted with the higher cost of human reproduction, and we need the state to artificially correct that by way of abortion rights. Both sides also tend to treat the debate as zero-sum. If they give any credence to the other side, they assume that they are losing something from their own side. So I reject these premises. I say that human rights are not in conflict, and that the libertarian principles of self-ownership and non-aggression actually resolve any apparent conflicts. I also say that women are not victims of their own sex. Not only are they self-owners with bodily autonomy and agency, but they are owners of a means of production, the ultimate means of production. And that is a strength. So my argument is that a consistent libertarian defense of women's rights does in fact require recognizing fetal self-ownership, that is, fetal rights.
Please.
All right, well, I am the publisher of Skeptic magazine. I didn't bring our abortion issue, but we did an issue on abortion because it's a hot topic. I commissioned a pro-life position. I didn't know there was your position. I would have commissioned you. So when we return to this in Skeptic, we will have you make the other argument because it's pretty good, actually. Anyway, so I've written about probably 10,000, probably a 10,000 word essay. I broke up into 3 parts for this. I didn't want to read it to you, so I looked myself up on Gemini. It's pretty good, actually. Michael Shermer advocates for pro-choice in the abortion debate by emphasizing several key arguments. Bodily autonomy. Shermer argues that individuals have the right to make decisions about their own bodies. Right. Well, that's kind of like your argument. The principle of bodily autonomy is central to a pro-choice position, asserting that a woman should have control over her reproductive choices without government interference. Yeah, okay. So there's the standard libertarian argument, and also pro-choice. Reducing unwanted pregnancies. Okay, this is my argument that the problem we face as a society is not abortion. The problem is unwanted pregnancies. Why are women getting pregnant when they don't want to be? Because when they want to get pregnant, they don't get abortions. They don't talk about medical tissue that they're going to have removed. They talk about the joys of their coming baby, right? It's a completely different vocabulary and attitude and so on. So the question, I just want to take it one level deeper. Abortion is just, this is what I'm going to do about this thing that happened. And before there was modern medical abortions, women did different things. First of all, the back alley abortions were terrible. But even before that, they just waited, gave birth, and then committed infanticide. That was actually quite high before the 20th century. So one way or the other, if women don't want babies, they're not going to have them. That's just what's going to happen. Whether you like it or not, whether the state wants to do something about it, too bad, it's not going to happen. Okay? So the question then is, well, what should we do about the deeper problem? Why are people getting pregnant when they don't want to be? Right? Education, access to birth control, open communication, economic stability and power. And so these are kind of the underlying reasons. You know, why are women getting pregnant when they don't want it? Because they're having sex unprotected. Why are they having unprotected sex? They don't know, or they don't have access to birth control. Or on the religious front, you know, they're practicing abstinence, which is a really bad idea. Because what you call people practicing abstinence is parents, because, you know, in the heat of the moment, you know, on Sunday morning at church, you can take the abstinence pledge and go, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, much like we all do about our diets. Right after a big dinner, tomorrow my diet starts. Yeah, good luck with that in 12 hours from now, right? So that's the problem. And we know from studies of large groups of young teenage girls who practice abstinence, some non-trivial percentage of them get pregnant, and some non-trivial percentage of those claim they never had sex. So this miraculous parthenogenic virgin birth process seems to be happening because they're raised in families that are not open to having these kinds of conversations. Anyway, okay, so I make finally a distinction between an actual life and a potential life. All right, so even if you grant fetal self-ownership, women also have self-ownership, way more developed than a 16-cell, little tiny nothing inside the womb. It may be a potential human, but it's not a human in the same level as an adult human female, which takes us to the transition. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to get in.
Our first conference in almost 10 years will be held in the Cincinnati area on October 17th, 2026, and we want you to be there. The Christians for Liberty 2026 conference will be held at the Village Vineyard Church in South Lebanon, Ohio, which is in the greater Cincinnati area. This conference will feature guest speakers, interviews, and a panel with authors from our upcoming book, 4 Views Reconciling Faith and Freedom. While all of these sessions will be recorded, and that means you'll be participating in live Christians for Liberty Network podcasts, there's stuff at this conference that you simply won't get on a podcast. You'll get to meet some of your favorite thinkers in the liberty movement and build relationships with other advocates for faith and freedom. And the earlier you order, the better the deal you'll get on your pass. Get yours now at libertarianchristians.com/conference. See you there.
All right, so we're already having some measure of consistent agreement, but let's try to put this frame on the topic for a second. Here's what I want to kind of propose with you. Okay, we know that libertarianism is built on self-ownership. So if that's the foundation, then who counts as the self-owner is going to be the most foundational question in this system. So do either of you kind of disagree where this abortion debate actually lives in this kind of zone for us as libertarians? Is this the right place where we should be having this discussion in this respect?
Well, I certainly think it is. I think that the principle of self-ownership, the whole idea. Yeah, sorry. Is that better? Yeah. Can you hear better now? Okay, thank you. The whole idea of self-ownership is that rights are inherent to us, to our humanity. And that's really, really important because if they are not inherent, they're conferred upon us by somebody else. And when they're conferred upon us by somebody else, that means that they're revocable, they're repealable, or they're amendable. If they are inherent, they cannot be taken away. They may be violated, but they cannot ever be taken away from us. And so the principle of self-ownership actually requires only 2 criteria. Number 1, that you are a human being, and number 2, you have direct and immediate control over your body. So very simply, the fetus actually qualifies as a self-owner. 1, because it is human. The genome actually tells us that they're human. And they have direct and immediate control over their body. This actually is an interesting feature of embryology. At the completion of conception, you have what's called a maternal zygotic transition that occurs over the 3 days from fertilization to the completion of conception. At the end, you have an autonomous and self-organizing, new, living, unique human. And embryology supports this. And so what do you have at that point? Well, mom isn't actually directing development at that point. All she's doing is providing an environment. All of the development that happens from conception onward is at the direction of the fetal genome. I will say that there is a stage where you have a potential versus actual human. And that is that stage from fertilization to the completion of conception. You do not have a new, unique, living human, scientifically speaking, until that maternal zygotic transition completes. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get fertilization and it doesn't complete. When it doesn't complete, it doesn't have the, it doesn't fit the standard qualifications for a living organism. So the next question then is, well, whose rights supersede the others? And that's the wrong question to be asking. Because a woman has a right to make choices about her own body. And she has a right to choose not to use her body to get pregnant. But there's a natural limitation on that right once she becomes pregnant, because now she has a new rights owner in her body. And that's not a limitation that's put on her by a man, unless she's coerced into sex. We could talk about rape. And that's not put on her by the state. That is a natural limitation. And she, of course, retains the right to not get pregnant again in the future. But once she's pregnant, once there's a new rights bearer, that natural right is limited, and she may not aggress against it.
Carrie, could a woman who embraces pro-choice agree with you and say, yeah, I choose not to have abortions because I think the living creature inside me is a, self-owning person, so I choose not to? Sure. Yeah, okay, so what's the problem here? The problem is that we live in a society in which a state says, well, if we're going to pass a law, then we're going to enforce it. And if killing a human, a person, is murder, then we're going to do something about that. The state will, and then you have the problem. You're not allowed to choose. You can't say, well, I think I'll keep this one, and okay, the next one, no, I don't want to have 16 kids. I'm going to just abort the rest of them or whatever. I don't believe in birth control. Whatever, that's your choice. The state's going to go, no, sorry.
So this is really good to bring up, because pro-life libertarianism is distinct from pro-life authoritarianism. And I think that that's very important to understand. In the conventional debate, we're talking about an authoritarian enforcement of abortion prohibition. And that can happen one of two ways. One, you have the incrementalist view, which is to try to ban the procedures or the medications that are used in abortion, or to regulate the industry such that it becomes very difficult to have an abortion. Both of those things don't work in a libertarian legal order, because we don't believe that the state has a role in regulating healthcare or any other industry. We also don't believe in banning products just because they can be dangerous, right? If that were true, there would be grounds for gun control, because gun control can murder people, or guns can murder people. They can be used in the murder of people. So what does libertarian enforcement of abortion prohibition look like? Well, first of all, if you are aggressing against somebody such that it ends their life, that is categorical murder. But in a libertarian legal order, you don't have a situation where you have the state coming down and being suspect of absolutely every fetal death that goes through a hospital, right? There's a very real concern with pro-life authoritarianism that miscarriage will get wrapped up in that enforcement, and that's a problem. And we know that that's a problem. We know that it would be wrong to prosecute miscarriage, because miscarriage isn't the initiation of violence against the fetus. It is an unfortunate tragedy that happens, but the non-aggression principle is about is the obligation to not aggress against another rights bearer. So there's a distinction there. So what would it look like for enforcement? Well, you wouldn't have a case where the state is coming down and investigating every single fetal death. That's authoritarianism. You would have a situation where perhaps somebody, a family member who tried to persuade, the woman to not abort, who has evidence that an abortion took place. Now, the other feature of libertarian enforcement is that we don't actually have to use retributive justice. And I think that this is a very big problem for conventional pro-lifers, especially the abortion abolitionists, because most of us understand that the reasons why women get abortion have nothing to do with criminal intent.
I want to have you said a lot here, and I want Michael to have a chance to kind of respond and
Sorry, go ahead.
turn for a variety of the different points.
There's a lot really good stuff there. I mean, from a scientific perspective, it's difficult to know where to draw the line. It's like, when is it okay for children and then teenagers and so on to drive a car? Well, we're going to make it 16, or to drink alcohol, we're going to make it 18. Well, you mean, so if I'm 17 years old and 364 days, I'm not quite ready for drinking, but the next day I am? Of course not. I mean, this is ridiculous. You got to draw the line somewhere. You got to have laws and so on. So in the case of abortion, I mean, the trimester system is, what happened with Roe v. Wade. So we say, okay, the first trimester is fine, third trimester, not so good. Second trimester, it's a little gray in there, maybe make it 20 weeks, 22 weeks, something like that. And, most of the states that allow it, that, they draw the line somewhere there. Why? It's a really hard question to answer. It could be, when the lights come on inside, that is, sentience comes on, there's some kind of neural connections and networks up there in which there's a sense of feeling or awareness, maybe, the heartbeat that's stated earlier. And, can it feel pain is another argument. This goes back to Jeremy Bentham's footnote, actually, in his utilitarianism book on animals. It's not can they think or can they talk, but can they feel? Can they suffer? Can they suffer? So does a fetus suffer in an abortion? Well, not at 16 weeks or whatever, it's just not, but at, 8 months, yeah. Okay, so, but where? There's no good place to draw the line there. So I think that's part of the problem, why we have these debates. I think overturning Roe v. Wade, it's not as bad as my liberal friends think it was, just returning to the states, just let people have these arguments. Okay, fine. I was going to also argue on the issue of rights. Carrie, if you move to North Korea, your rights are gone as a woman. Now, I guess you'd say I still have those rights, but they're violated. I don't know, try telling that to the Kim regime. They don't care, right? In a way, I mean, I could go both ways on this argument. In a way, you got to have a powerful state with a military and a police to make sure your rights are not violated. So, Bentham famously said rights, are nonsense and natural rights are nonsense on stilts. So I get some of that argument, although I do think society as a whole, history has moved over the centuries in the direction of granting more rights to more people in more places more of the time, including all the way down to animals. And I think that's a good thing, in a sense that we're discovering that the idea of bodily autonomy is what people actually want. It's the kind of moral value you can generalize to others, and generalizability of a moral principle is one of the foundations of an ethical system. So I think we're moving in that direction. But I'm not completely convinced that everybody agrees with that. So I'm glad to live in America and not North Korea because there's somebody that's going to protect my rights. As for, the fetus, when does it have rights? Well, in the state of California, when Scott Peterson murdered his wife, Lacey Peterson, she was, 8 months pregnant or whatever. So it's a double homicide. Okay, there's he killed 2 people. Now, if Lacey Peterson was, 6 weeks pregnant, it probably wouldn't even know, or, would not be an issue, right? So at some point, the state goes, okay, now it's a person, right? Again, where do you draw the line? That's a hard one, from a scientific perspective. Maybe you flip over into philosophy and just go, this is the argument we're making. There's no discovery we're going to make about heartbeat or neural networks or whatever.
So let me answer that, because this is a really good point to bring up. One of the problems with the personhood debate is that it's a metaphysical category. It is not it's not a legal question, it's a metaphysical question. And actually, it's one that even the United States government does not apply. If you look at the decision in Roe v. Wade, one of the things that they had to grapple with was the personhood status of Norma McCovey as Jane Roe. And one of the things that the court said was that they were accepting that McCovey, by way of her pseudonym, Jane Roe, was a rights bearer, and only because of her presumed mere existence. They didn't have a test for consciousness or rationality or sentience or any of these things. They accepted her personhood by virtue of her humanity. And the 14th Amendment, the whole reason why that was ratified was to correct the selecting of classes within the United States. It was to correct the reality that those people who were enslaved were actually full rights bearers by virtue of their human existence. So even in our own courts, we don't actually try to establish personhood. We don't separate personhood from rights-bearing status. And humanity has an abysmal history with attempting to do that. In fact, women have been on the receiving end of that. And every single argument that's used against the fetus and fetal rights has been used against women. There was what was the other thing that you had mentioned?
The kind of the spectrum or the sequence, or I don't know, the gray area where you draw the line of when a person becomes. So you're just drawing it at conception.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the completion thereof.
Completion of conception. Okay. So when a woman has a natural abortion, what is that? It's not murder. Is it unfortunate death or something?
Yeah, we call that a miscarriage.
Miscarriage. Yeah.
And miscarriage can happen for any number of natural reasons, like, it's a natural death. And we don't criminalize natural death because there's no initiation of violence.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, it's Doug from LCI. As you may know, the team at Podsworth Media has worked with us for a long time, producing our content for most of the Christians for Liberty network. A big part of that over the past couple of years has been using the Podsworth app to make our audio sound clean, level, and professional, even when the raw recordings were super sketchy, like this one you're listening to right now. Believe it or not, this recording was that bad before I ran it through the Podsworth app, and you can hear the full before and after demo yourself at podsworth.com. The app recently got a huge update, and it's now better than ever. So good, in fact, that it can take almost any atrocious voice recording and make it sound great. Here's how it works. It removes background noise, cuts down on plosives, fixes clipping when your gain is too high, removes clicks and pops, reduces reverb, improves tone, and levels out the dialogue so that you don't get any crazy volume jumps. Everybody hates that in a podcast. Using it is super simple. You just go to podsworth.com and click Get Started, drag and drop the audio files, open them right up from your phone's browser, customize your settings however you want, but honestly, the default works great for most settings, and here's the really cool thing. If you enter code LCI50, you'll get 50% off your first order. No account needed, just your email and payment. You'll get a download link in your inbox with cleaned up files. It's perfect for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, you name it. If your recording sounds rough, the Podsworth app can make it not only sound listenable, but professional. And remember, when you use code LCI50, you get half off your first order, and you'll also be supporting the work here at LCI.
So, Mike, I want to give you a chance to respond to what she said here, and then I have a question that I think...
Well, I think the other point I'm going to make on conflicting rights, I always like Thomas Sowell's idea of, there's no perfect answer, utopia solutions. They're just compromises we all make, and conflicting rights is one of those. You can't have everything, all right? So we just do the best we can. And I joked about the trans issue, but we've dealt a lot with that in Skeptic. That I want to support women's rights. I want to support trans rights. I don't care what anybody wants to do or be as an individual. Doesn't matter to me. I want them to be free to choose their own bodily autonomy as they want. But if a man wants to go into a woman's sports or locker room, sorry, you can't do that because women have hard-earned the right to have their own sports and their own spaces to be free from men. So, sorry, you can't have everything, right? Your right as a trans woman, a man, has been trumped by women's rights. That's the way it goes, right? So, I think in the same way, I make the argument for pro-choice in favor of women over the fetus, also in part because men have always lorded it over women on reproductive rights. There's something special about sex. So I have a whole discussion on that in my long essay on this, skeptic.com. And this has to do with basic evolutionary biology that starts with the idea of mama's baby and daddy's maybe is the little catchphrase that evolutionary biology. Men are never 100% certain, although the woman is. So there's always a level of doubt on the part of the man. Is that my genetics I'm raising? Because if you're investing in somebody else's genes, that is a very costly error to make in terms of natural selection. So men are programmed to try to lord it over women to make sure that she's true and faithful to me. And as you know, historically, this is not always good. Men stalk, they do what's called mate guarding. Their kinds of jealousy are different than women's, and on. Historically, women have always kind of taken it on the chin by men. So I'm always nervous about, going back to the pro-life argument, that men will glom onto that as an excuse to control women, and that's not a good thing.
So thank you for bringing that up. I want to go back to what I mentioned in the beginning, that women are owners of a means of production. When we don't typically think of women and pregnancy in terms of economics. But if we did, we would understand that her reasons for seeking abortion are actually market signals. And so what happens is when we offer legal abortion, what the state is doing is it is allowing us to obscure those market signals so that they're not received. That is being offered in lieu of necessary market signals. When a woman says she can't afford to have a baby, she's probably right. And currently we're experiencing a cost of living crisis. And so it's very obvious that when a woman says, I can't have a baby, I can't afford to have a baby, the cost of pregnancy just up to birth right now is estimated at about $18,000. Those market signals are not getting to the people who are actually in a position to make changes. And why? Well, because we're offering abortion in lieu of those solutions. This is true for every single reason that a woman will say, I can't have a baby right now. It's true even in the case of rape. And it's crumbs from the table of justice. It's crumbs from the table of innovation. And women deserve way more than that. But the only way that women are going to have that recognized is if we recognize the truth of our own reality. Yes, we are self-owners. We have bodily autonomy and agency. And we are in possession of the capacity to produce new humans. And that's no small thing. But currently our market signals are being obscured by abortion.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're beginning to develop some interesting common ground here. And so I want to hopefully kind of spur on that dialogue as well, in that, Michael, I think you also agree that there's, for instance, you've noted, you said this about North Korea, that you go to North Korea, rights evaporate. Well, there is a rights-bearing group there, they're the North Koreans, and they will potentially aggress against those who they are saying are the non-rights-bearing groups. And in addition, you've already, and you even mentioned historically that is, and you've written about this, that rights-bearing groups that have power over non-rights-bearing groups, well, the non-rights-bearing groups are going to get harmed. Well, Kerry is also using a parallel structure here, and that's that the fetus is in that position, but then as we also observe that when we keep expanding those rights, you noted this as well, that we tend to do better. So is this an opportunity that we should be exploring more with these types of solutions that would, or are we getting into the frame of incoherency here?
Yeah, interesting. I guess, Kara, I'd ask, if you encounter women that are heading for an abortion or whatever, would you try to talk them out of it? In other words, your solution is a bottom-up, let's educate and influence people and show them, hey, this is a rights-bearing, this is a self-ownership type. Remember that scene in Juno when Ellen Page, now Elliot, is going to the abortion clinic and her friend says, babies have, or your baby has fingernails. She goes, fingernails? Right? She's kind of trying to convey to her, that's a person inside there. Fingernail. That's weird, right? So, that's kind of an educational bottom-up, yeah. But ultimately, what if the woman goes, sorry, Kerry, I'm just going to do this. I can't afford it. I at this point in my life, can't do it.
So this I think is where, where we have to question the goal in ending abortion, right? You have some very militant pro-lifers out there, particularly the abortion abolitionists, who are willing to throw down the hammer and throw her in prison, right? Some have even advocated for the death penalty. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. First of all, in order to move into a pro-life society, we need a paradigm shift. Because most of our girls, even boys, have been raised to believe that that's not a human being, that it's just a clump of cells. And I've got news for you, we're still just a clump of cells.
Large.
But we have this idea of inherent human rights. Now, I will say a key difference between pro-life libertarianism and pro-life authoritarianism has to do with where order comes from. In a libertarian society, we hold that spontaneous or emergent order is where real order comes from. As a Christian, I believe that the best way to make change is through persuasion and not using the strong arm of the law. Now, with that said, I do hold in principle that a libertarian legal order should actually consider abortion to be murder. But part of what we're talking about here is the how do we get there question, right? Which libertarians have to face all the time. And I think that the way that we get there has more to do with ensuring that, number one, we're receiving those market signals, inflation, cost of housing, cost of food. We just got done with the debate before us was talking about socialism or Marxism versus capitalism. And the Marxist wants to nationalize housing and food and all the basic needs. But those are the most expensive right now because they are the most regulated. They are the most, they're the things that socialists want to collectivize the most. And that's what's jacking up all the prices, right? Incidentally, we should go to Q&A after this.
Yeah. Well,
incidentally, one thing that I do want to point out is that if we recognize women as owners of a means of production, that says something about socialism, right? Socialism, communism, what is that? Well, that's the collective ownership of the means of production. Women have the most to lose from socialism.
So I'll pose this final question, and then we'll get into some Q&A from the audience here, which will try to direct this question specifically to me.
Okay, if you want to just go to that, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do that. We can go ahead and do that. I was going to give you one more chance, kind of a last word, then, and let the folks give a chance.
Oh, well, I guess in my fantasy world, there's no abortions because women aren't getting pregnant when they don't want to. Of course, people screw up all the time, so that's never going to happen. But could we get it down to a manageable number? The evidence from other countries looks pretty good. Education, economic opportunity, healthcare, access to birth control, and so on, seems to lead to a decrease in the number of abortions. That is, women are just doing something about it before they get pregnant. Will that work here? I don't know, and not perfectly. But if we could get the numbers down, the numbers are pretty high. I mean, it's just striking. Maybe it's an educational problem and so forth. I don't know. Anyway.